All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, first of all, to this webinar from Indian Space Society. And we have this webinar called an introduction to the space medicine. And I would like to introduce the guest of honor tonight. We have Eleonor Frost with us, and she is a recent graduate of UCL with an honors degree in physics and medical physics, currently studying medicine in Scotland. Eleanor works on the AMSRO Women in Aerospace Medicine group as a student leader as well as a social media coordinator. And we all have heard about the Space Generation Advisory Council. She is even a part of it. She is vice lead for the Space Medicine and Life Sciences group that is a part of SGAC. So let us hear from Eleanor herself and let us shed some light on the space medicine concept. So I hand over the session to Eleanor.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'll just start by trying to share my screen. Hopefully that's working. Right, so hopefully that's working and you can see. So today I'll be speaking a little bit about space medicine and also the SGAC and our smaller space medicine life sciences group within that, just in case anyone's interested in joining and seeing what we're all about really. So a little bit more about me. I did a bachelor's, as was mentioned, in physics and medical physics, and during that I got to do a module in space medicine and extreme environment physiology under the direction of Dr. Kevin Fong. And I also took part in something called the Student Aerospace Challenge, which I would encourage you all to look into. It's an international competition, and you just work in a team to respond to lots of different questions that they set you. You essentially write a thesis in the end. We had quite a big document, and the team that I led was called the Paraba Ladies. So we're also on Twitter and that kind of thing. And we're working on the space tourism side of space medicine. So I'll be mentioning that also a little bit later. And my dissertation, as you can see, was on the feasibility and design of a microgravity surgical workstation. So that was kind of bringing together the engineering from my degree in physics, along with my interest in space medicine in general. So looking at the surgery side, because it's not really a field that's really been explored very much. A year after that, I worked as an assistant researcher for ISS at King's, and that's the International Space School Education Trust. And they mainly run mission discovery programs, which is where school students can join the program for a week, and you get lectures from lecturers at prestigious universities. You can also sometimes meet astronauts. You've got mentors that are helping you, like me, so that's what I was working at. And you design your experiments for space, and you compete against other teams of students, and the winning students get their experiments actually sent to space. So I developed the 2 experiments that got sent to the International Space Station in March 2 years ago. Other things I've done, I really just put here to give you an idea of the kind of things that you can get involved with. So I did the BAS student paper competition, and through that I went to the International Astronautical Congress, which is a very big conference, often based in the US, with all things space industry really, but there's a little contingent in space medicine as well. And I'm working at the moment in the Women in Aerospace Medicine group, which I would encourage you all to join, because we've got a great mentoring program coming. We've got webinars every week, and that's been a really fulfilling experience. And finally, I'm vice lead for the space medicine group within the SGAC, which I'll be talking a little bit about more later. So currently I'm a first year medical student. I've gone back to university up in Scotland, entering my 2nd year in September. I'm finished now for the holidays, so I can do these kinds of presentations. So here you've just got a few pictures from different presentations I've done. In the bottom is our work with ISET, where we got to actually meet a few astronauts and work with them when we were developing the experiments. And then there was a very random experience of working with Adidas as well, because I think space is becoming quite a big buzzword and a lot of people are very interested in it. So it's really the time to get involved and get your projects out there. So as I mentioned, I'll be introducing space medicine, really the basics of it, and all the different questions that come into it, how many avenues you can explore for your own work, and the SGAC and our little group within that. So starting with space medicine, I would say there are 2 main branches to it. There's how can medicine help the humans that are currently in space and keep them alive and keep them healthy and get them back to Earth safely? But there's also the space research that we can do that can help humanity back on Earth, how we can learn from microgravity research, for example. So starting with the humans in space. As you can see here, there's a lot of experiments that are run in space on the astronauts themselves, which is quite unusual. They are kind of often treated as lab rats, some people might say, but it's really because we're trying to understand what microgravity does to their body. And it's such a different experience to being on Earth that we can do some medical experiments up there that we haven't really tested before. So starting off, here we've got a very crude diagram, I'm afraid. It's not very good looking, but it's just to give you an idea of all the different things that happen to the body in microgravity. So in terms of the neurological side, you get an increased fluid shift. So the shift of fluid up from your legs into your upper body and your head. That's because there's no gravity pulling it down. Usually, as we're on Earth, we have more fluid in our legs than in our upper body. And through that pressure increase in your head, you also get some eye changes and something called space adaptation syndrome, which essentially is like space sickness. So when you're car sick in a car moving around, you can also get that in space, and most astronauts start by feeling quite nauseous. In terms of the psychological side, you've got the overview effect, which you might have heard of. So when astronauts look out the window and can see the curvature of the Earth and how fragile we are in the universe, they all talk about this big psychological shift. Heart and cardiovascular wise, you get blood pressure set points which are lower. Due to that fluid shift, you also get possible atrophy of the heart, which obviously is not ideal if you're wanting to return to Earth. And then respiratory, they haven't found many long-term effects on the lungs, but the airflow seems to be more uniform. So as you can see in this diagram here on the right, we've got the 1G, then that fluid shift you can see up here. And as you adapt, you start to deal with that fluid shift a bit better. You get rid of some of the fluids, and when you come back to Earth, it's back to that normal sort of set point. In terms of muscular changes, you obviously have to use your muscles or you lose them. So you do lose some muscle mass because you're not working against gravity as you are on Earth. And it's mainly in the legs, and some bone density as well can change. And because of that same thing, you're not stressing bones as you do under gravity. So you get a lot of bone changes and remodeling, and that can increase the fracture risk when you come back to Earth, which is not ideal. So that's why we need doctors to help look after the astronauts. This is just another example of the kind of simplified look at space medicine and all the things that can happen, but it also actually compares male and female astronauts. As you can see, the whole body is really affected. The ones that I've highlighted are really the ones that are interesting in terms of the comparison. Men mount less of an immune response in general. And then if you actually have a think about the ISS and how everything is in microgravity, they tend to have very high bacterial colony counts. And that's because in microgravity, your bacteria can start growing in all directions as opposed to really just in a 2D flat surface. So you have a lot more issues with bacterial infections. And astronauts also have some impairment of their vision, as I mentioned, because of that fluid shift. And that differs from male to female astronauts, which is definitely an interesting consideration that has come into it since we've been sending astronauts up for over a year, because it seems like that starts to become quite significant past the year point. And if we're thinking of missions to Mars for 3 years, then you can imagine that we're going to want to solve that issue before we send astronauts to Mars and they start losing their vision halfway through the mission. So the main ways that you can summarize the challenges to human health, particularly in space, is through these 5 sort of main topics. To start with, you've got radiation. You've got increased radiation and possible radiation sickness if they're exposed to that for a long time. In the atmosphere of the Earth, we're relatively protected by the magnetic field and that kind of thing from the radiation that's coming off the sun and from the background radiation as well in the universe. But if we're going to leave that kind of safe haven and go to Mars, then it's definitely a mission critical issue that we need to solve. It could cause damage to the central nervous system, damage to tissues. It could be carcinogenic. We really don't know much. And that's why we need to do a lot more research in it before we start sending astronauts further for longer. And then in terms of the isolation side, something that we've started to think about now a bit more, but something that's not really a consideration on the ISS at the moment, is that you get psychological stress from the isolation and confinement. Imagine seeing your home planet like a star in the sky and feeling very far away from home. It can definitely have an impact on mood, cognition, morale, and even your interpersonal interactions with the rest of the crew, which are really very important if there's only 6 of you, for example. You can also get some sleep issues from the stress, and the lack of fresh food is actually something astronauts have reported is very hard to deal with, just because they can't really get fresh food, and when they do, it's often gone very fast after that resupply mission that's brought them. So they love the smell of oranges, for example, when they first open the hatches of the Dragon capsule. But it really is dependent on the astronaut how much that affects their mood as well. Distance from Earth plays into that, so you've got communication delays. You can't call mission control real time. If you're traveling to Mars, you'll have a 20-minute or so delay, and that can be very isolating. That can make you feel like there's no backup plan, and you really need to be in control of the situation. That also means from a medical standpoint that you need to have autonomy on medical decisions, because if someone's injured, you can't wait 20 minutes to send a message and 20 minutes for it to come back. You also need to prepare for all accidents and disasters. You're going to have limited medical supplies and technology as well, because as you fly far from Earth, some of the engineers might know the heavier the spacecraft you send, the more fuel you're going to need, the heavier it is, and it's really sort of a catch because you want to minimize the weight that you send. And there's also a huge distance and time for evacuation if you need to get someone to safety, so you need to have the capacity to deal with any emergency, but yet you'll have limited supplies and technology, so it will really be a trade-off in the end. Gravity here is listed as a challenge because changes in the gravity field can definitely affect the human body. So we've got 1G on Earth. At the moment on the ISS, you've got close to 0G. I prefer microgravity. And then on the Moon and Mars, you have 1/3 and 1/6G as well, respectively. So that can definitely affect the human body if you're also changing from one to the other, if you're in microgravity and then go to the Moon, and then you've got the 1/6G. You've got all these shifts of fluids a lot, but also just in bone and muscle mass. You've got also changes to cardiac physiology, so your heart will start changing. We don't know yet, sort of 100%, if you like, if that's cardiac atrophy or just because of that fluid change, then the cardiac muscle is sort of becoming imbibed in this fluid. And you've got that visual impairment I've spoken about, which is a big issue that has really only recently come about, only recently been discovered as such, and is definitely an issue we need to solve. The closed environment, as I mentioned, there's an ultra microbiome and microorganisms. You've got air quality and contaminants issues because you're in a completely closed loop system. That can stress the immune system, and the immune system often is quite blunted in space, so you definitely don't want your astronauts to be coming down with anything, but if they do, then the whole rest of the crew can quite easily become infected. Something that's interesting is that space medicine has a lot of limitations to the research we do. So the sample size, for example, often not all astronauts agree to undergo the same experiments, and so you end up with a sample size of just a few astronauts undergoing the same testing. And also in terms of longitudinal studies, you've got a few astronauts that you can follow long term, but you can't really do the whole cohort because they're going up to space at different times for different amount of time and that kind of thing. You've got imbalances in gender and age. As you can imagine, at the moment, there are very few female astronauts, and often astronauts are selected to be really within an age range. You don't have very young or very old astronauts. You've got the length of the missions, which differ every time. So if you're sending up an experiment with one astronaut and want to copy it again with another, then the mission might be completely different. And they might also be doing different things during their missions, taking different medications, everything that affects the kind of medicine trial that you would ideally want to have. Ethical considerations as well. You can't really do any invasive procedures on astronauts, and they have to all essentially agree to the experiments that they're taking part in. Launch limitations, as I mentioned, are mainly in weight, in how much space things take up, in how much power they use. And those are all things that all your medical equipment is going to have to undergo rigorous testing for and have to be accepted on board. And you've got medical doctor training as well. So often on board the ISS, there isn't always a doctor. There happen to be astronauts that are doctors, but they're not required to have much more than basic medical training to help their fellow crew members. So in terms of the countermeasures that space medicine has come up with, really are mainly exercise protocols. So as you can see on the left, you've got a running treadmill. Astronauts have to work out about 2.5 hours per day just to help maintain that muscle and bone loss and not get it to a point where it becomes a big issue when they come back to Earth. They still don't mitigate all of the muscle loss, but also it very much depends on the astronauts. Some have come back to Earth actually having put on weight, some have lost a lot of weight. It depends. They also have a quarantine, which we're now all used to reduce infections, and they've always done that before going up to space, and that's because they really don't want to bring anything up because it would really spread like wildfire, and it would be very hard to get rid of. Down here on the left is that quarantine facility for the Apollo astronauts. As you can see, it's really been in place a long time, and they're behind these screens even after saying goodbye to family and stuff. They're here for 2 weeks. So as a psychological thing, that can also be quite tough, seeing your family on the other side of the screen, not being able to say goodbye to them. But there are now some workarounds sort of in doing testing of the families and having them isolate as well, that you can see them before they fly. So you might be aware, but this is the global space exploration roadmap. And really the main idea is that we're hoping to get to the moon and then on to Mars. And that means a lot of work on the space medicine side, because the human body will be exposed to stresses that we've never exposed them to before, particularly on the way to Mars. And we will also have unprecedented levels of sort of medical knowledge by then, hopefully. A lot of testing done, particularly in the deep space gateways, where they're hoping to do a lot of the testing of their medical equipment and medical capabilities, just to be sure that when we're going to Mars, we're in the best position possible to keep our astronauts safe. So moving on to space tourism, which is a little bit closer to home. There have been a lot of increases in space tourism, a lot of interest. As you can see here, we've actually got at the bottom that we already have 7 space tourists, and that's people who paid to go on a flight to the ISS. There's a lot of writing on these slides, but the main thing I want you to focus on is those out of the 557 people that have been to space, then there are 7 space tourists, and here you've got them. You've got Dennis Tito, who visited the ISS for 7 days. And then he was followed by Mark Shuttleworth, and there was Gregory Olson as well. And these people are not astronauts. They don't have to go the same screening as astronauts. So it was actually very interesting as well to see how they dealt with the space environment. And they obviously had to undergo rigorous medical testing to be accepted. But they weren't all really in the prime of their life as astronauts think that they are. So the human body can definitely deal with the environment of space, and especially for these short amount of time, but a few of them did have to have some medical interventions to be sure that they would be able to comfortably have a flight to space. Now next on the space tourism sort of horizon is the Virgin Galactic flights. We've also got the Blue Origin flights that I've just seen. I think it's Jeff Bezos is hoping to get to space in the next month. So that's definitely something to look out for. And those Virgin Galactic flights have kind of already started going up. We haven't got any tourists yet. We've just had people from the company who've flown up, but they're hoping to get up and going soon. And as you can imagine, with the kind of people that we'll be sending on space tourism flights, we're going to need a lot of medicine to support them, because anyone that can afford a ticket theoretically can go up, and that might not be people who are in the best health, and might be people with different medical conditions. So it's something that we're working on to try and sort of decide on the medical checks that will ensure that people are healthy enough to go to space, even if they buy a ticket, sort of regardless of all the different considerations that come into the fact that it's commercial. So there's a question as to whether you can ever really refuse someone on medical grounds, but that's something the companies are going to have to decide on before they start selling tickets as well. So space tourism and medicine have a lot of overlap, as you've heard, but the main thing that I wanted to highlight is if you look at the general sort of parabola that they're hoping to send space tourists on. You can see that the altitude have to be 110 kilometers if they want to be classed as going into space, which is the line of 100 kilometers. You've got some quite high speeds, oscillations, and noise as well. So anyone with a medical condition is going to have to be able to sort of support those and be comfortable. In terms of radiation levels, they're not too high, and they should be quite sort of feasible for anyone. You've got quite a long duration of flight as well, but a lot of change in gravity, which will be the main consideration. You're going to be going from high gravity to zero gravity and then back to high gravity on the way down. So it might not be the most comfortable flight. And if astronauts sort of have space sickness, then you might have some space tourists getting space sick as well. I'll just give you a second to read this quote, which is one of my favorites. So as you can see right now, we don't really know what means that someone is allowed to go up to space or not. And I'm hoping the companies have got all that, but they haven't released that kind of information yet. So there's a lot of space for innovation. There's a lot of space for people to come up with projects, come up with research of any age, really. So in terms of the space tourism side of things, having a look at that flight, you can sort of predict what kind of effects that'll have on the body. The radiation won't be too high, but it's definitely not a level that you'll want to expose someone under 18 or a pregnant woman to. You've got levels of acceleration that could be an issue for anyone with fractures or anyone with osteoporosis, for example, which is where the bones are a bit weaker. Noise and vibration levels might be a bit uncomfortable, but they should be completely tolerable. And cabin air pressure and air content is actually supposedly going to be quite similar to an airline flight. So anyone that can happily go on an airline flight should be happy on one of these. The main thing is going to be the microgravity. You've only got sort of under 5 minutes of microgravity. So that fluid shift is going to be minimal compared to what the astronauts have, but you are still going to feel a bit like head full, like when you have a cold. And you'll have the motion sickness as well. And that will mainly just be because your brain will be overloaded from information. Going into microgravity is already a weird enough experience. You've got that fluid shift as well, and looking out the window as well. So there you go. This is a whole new era of space medicine, open to the next space generation. And that's my little segue into telling you about the Space Generation Advisory Council, which you might already be aware of. So I'll just show you all the different working groups that we have. If your interest isn't necessarily in medicine, there's all sorts of other things like cybersecurity, satellites, space law, and it's all on the website. So if you want to join any of these, you just join the project groups. It's completely free. It's open to 18 to 30-year-olds. 18 to 35, sorry. And it works closely with the UN, which gives opportunities that really, for students, we don't really have access to until now. So the SMLS is really quite a unique group. There's none other like it, really. It's very interdisciplinary. We have sort of students and young professionals actually from all over the world who are working in our group and working towards all these projects that I will be talking about a little bit later on. But our idea is to get those space applications for healthcare that I was talking about, and how our space research can help healthcare on Earth, but also to address the space medical issues that we get from going into space. So our two leads are both doctors. We've got Dr. Rochelle Vallot based in the UK and Anthony Ewan, who's based in the US. And they've recently started sort of changing over to a new leadership, but the group ethos remains the same, and they founded the group. So they'll be advising us throughout, but they both have an extensive background in space medicine and working with both space agencies and some analog space missions, as you can see in Rochelle's picture there. And this is our current team. And as you can see, if you have just a quick look at where everyone's based, they're really from all over the world. So we've got events and outreach experts who are helping us with doing different events. We've got membership coordinators, and there are positions up on the committee as well. So if you wanted to join, then you'd be very welcome to join the committee. We're always looking for new ideas and new people to get involved. So some of our opportunities, we mainly sort of communicate through our website. We've also got a great Slack community where we have a lot of people posting saying, I'm looking for a research project, I'm looking for this, or putting together a team for a competition and that kind of thing. So we've got a lot of ongoing projects, and it's really just about putting yourself out there and asking people if they have any projects going, finding people with a similar background to you if you're specifically into, for example, space pharmacy or that kind of thing. And we've also got a Twitter where we used to run a journal club, and now I think we'll start running that journal club in sort of Zoom meetings and make it a bit more official than the Twitter. But that's our website. But also if you just Google SGAC SMLS, then you'll be able to get to our page and join up and get our newsletter. And if you join the Slack, that's where a lot of the projects are posted, or if people are looking for a team. So just to give you a little idea of what we've done, we ran an event at Harwell in Oxford where we could visit the ESA site there. We also had the space generation workshop in London a couple of years ago. We've had the hackathon where we put teams together for that. We also had virtual workshops going. We have a monthly webinar as well. So if you join any of our social media or the Slack, then you'll get updates on that. And the journal club, as I say, will also be moving to a bit more of an official platform. We do a lot of collaborations on research. So these are kind of all the places that our members have put together a team through SMLS, or sort of found team members, or just posted saying, I want to enter this, who else wants to join? And we've got a few ongoing projects. So we've got a research project on intercranial pressure in space. We've got lots of competitions that we've entered as well, like the NASA Space Apps and that kind of thing. So it's a great place to get involved, but it's also a place where you make your own opportunities. So if you see any competitions that you want to enter but you don't have a team, just post it on there and you'll find a lot of people to join you. Or if you see someone else posting about something that they want to get a team together for, then put yourself forward and join the team. A lot of the work we do is centered around the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how we can use space medicine to answer some of these goals. And as you can see, a lot of them are quite accessible. In terms of number 3, which is good health and well-being, we can definitely use space technology to help with health on Earth. Also sustainable cities. There's been a lot of research in space architecture and working with engineers and the medical community. And life on land and life below water, you're always going to use innovations that we use for essentially getting humans to live in the most hostile environment, which is space, and how that can help life back on Earth. So in the future, we're looking towards in-space manufacturing. We're also looking towards telemedicine. Now, with those communication delays, there is a small caveat that might not always be possible, but telemedicine can definitely always support a crew. And we've got disease monitoring as well, using satellites that started to be developed during COVID, actually. So a lot of innovation coming, a lot of people that are interested. And so this is actually a bit out of date because there's been another crew launch since, but it really marks the beginning of launches from the US, and it'll increase accessibility to the ISS because flights will be cheaper than the Soyuz, and it'll be more accessible to tourists. I think even Tom Cruise wants to go up and film a movie. So in comparison, I think it's definitely very exciting innovations. And there's a lot of great things in the side of space medicine that's coming from the fact that we'll be sending up sort of tourists or non-astronauts. There's a lot to be learned from them, from their experience of going to space. But I think the future is very exciting, and being a part of that is definitely a great time to join. Just some other opportunities I thought I would put here just to give ideas on the kind of things you can join, get involved with. There's the ESA Your Thesis programs. You've got lots of summer training programs. I think with NASA, a lot of them will often be closed and only to US citizens, which is a shame. But ESA does have quite a lot of open opportunities. You've got the Student Aerospace Challenge that I mentioned, and that can be in other things than medicine. You can do them in engineering and stuff, and you get teams from all over the world coming to that. You can send experiments to space with ISIT if you have a look. I'm not sure if we have any programs based in India, but we definitely have some in Singapore. So I think we were thinking of developing one in India, but I'm not sure yet. You'll have to have a look on the website. Societies to join. Already the Indian Space Society is a great one to start with, but there's plenty more. So these are the UK based ones just because I'm based in the UK and they're the ones that I know. But at the end there, you've got international ones like ASMA, Women in Aerospace Medicine, and AMSRO. And those are all space medicine ones. But if you get into any community with the SGAC and ask people the kinds of societies that they're joining and ask people for specific advice, then everyone will be very happy to share the kind of local ones that they know. You can also run your own competitions, join any mentorship sort of schemes. We've got one coming in Women in Aerospace Medicine, and look out for journal clubs. But really, I mean, I've focused here on the kinds of careers that I can think of, but there's space for everyone in space, if you don't mind the pun. And whatever your background is, there'll be an application for your knowledge and for your skill set. So I definitely encourage anyone to get involved in the space industry, because even as a student, you've seen I've been allowed to have access to some opportunities that I never would have just in traditional medicine. So it is a great community and there are a lot of passionate people. So I've just put here some advice. I would add never to compare yourself to anyone else. Always forge your own path, because everyone has a very different background, has very different resources. So if you just do what you're enjoying and do something you're passionate about, then you'll have a good run of it. I use Twitter a lot, so that's where it comes in with the online presence. Twitter is a great place in terms of space medicine, but I'm sure other specialties also have their own different platforms that they prefer. Also asking for advice. I think I did a lot of cold emails where you just send an email to someone you don't know. I would say sort of add a specific request to that. Don't really just send an email saying, hi, I love this, can you help me? But just add specific advice or asking about someone's background or anything. People will love to help, as long as it's not writing a huge email on their life story kind of thing. But I'm happy to also help anyone and give anyone advice at different stages. If you've got specific questions, then I'll have my email at the end as well. And don't be afraid to fail. So that's a main one that I would say, just because you're a student and I've been a student this whole time, it doesn't mean that you don't have something to add. So I'd encourage you to get involved. And there you go. So that's my Twitter and my email. I've left a little bit of time for questions.